order the budget workshop of January 16th to order. First night. I know this has been a bit of a process for administration to get this ready, and I know that council's been waiting, but it's nice that we waited. All the impacts from the provincial government are known, so that's all in the budget, and so we can actually sit down and have a really good chat about what we see as the vision for a municipality, because this is the day and time and then when we spend the money that really defines what and how we want to be. So it's been a good thing, and so just as just a couple of quick reminders, as we go through the budget process, we should be everything we do should tie back to our strategic plan and the pillars on which we're trying to build our community. And remember that the money we spend should be totally focused on those outcomes. If it's not advancing our strategic plan, we shouldn't be doing it. I'll just open it up to the CAO for a couple of quick opening remarks. As we do that, though, just a reminder to council, I know we haven't had a whole lot of time with this book, so if we need to slow down and go faster, we can. If there's something that's not in the book that you'd like to get added, we'll make sure we get it on there. And if we have to send our administration away to do some work and come back and extend this process out, we can do that too. So don't feel we're under time pressure. Let's just get this, let's have a good conversation surrounding what we need and what we want to see, and we'll go from there. Open it up to the CAO.
Yes, thank you very much, Your Worship and members of council. Just a few words. Glad you mentioned the strategic plan. When this council developed their strategic plan 2.5 years ago, it was very aggressive. Looked at things like operational efficiency, service delivery was number one, changing the tax base and going after economic and business opportunities, institutional opportunities to change that tax base. And a number of directional plans, considerable number of directional plans. So there's a lot of activity in that strategic plan. You'll see in this budget that it continues to support the strategic plan. It continues to focus on that exceptional service delivery. You're going to see service enhancements that are built into the 1.7 tax increase, and Mike Daller's going to talk about that in a minute. But there are a ton of other ones that are not, that have been absorbed into the budget. Essentially, the directors have gone back into their 2019 numbers, and you'll see when we get into the details, a lot of 2020 numbers are actually lower than 2019. And the reason for that is we've looked at our organization. We have grown over the last 2.5 years to try and keep up to the pace that's going on in this region. We see some slowdown in growth for 2020, not a lot. But we believe we're staffed up and have the expertise to do a lot of the work that we were getting outside help to do, and Mike's going to talk about this a little bit more, and doing it in-house. So that's a big piece of this budget. The process has been tweaked again to what I believe is a best practice, and Mike can talk about that as well, in this region as far as presenting the budget. But your comment earlier, and I'll leave it at that after that, about this is a workshop, and if there's anything that we need to do to enhance this package before we take it out, we can do that. If there's anything that needs to come out of it, we can do that. So this is an opportunity to roll up our sleeves. I think our finance folks have done a remarkable job in pulling this together with the help of all of the directors. All of the directors have been more intimately involved in this budget than they ever have since they came here, and that is part of our business model, so that people own what they're presenting. So with that, and again, thanks to everybody for their participation. Thanks for council's patience in us getting here. There were reasons for that. And with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Dowler and Mr. DeBlanco. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and members of council. We are very pleased to present the proposed 2020 operating and capital budgets. These budgets work together as an overall commitment to invest in and maintain the programs, services, and infrastructure for the citizens of Beaumont. Administration also believes these budgets deliver on Council's strategic plan goals of good governance, build and maintain infrastructure, and operational efficiencies as some examples. This presentation will start with some general comments on the budget and financial reporting process, specifically what is different and what is being planned for the future. We'll then touch on the current economic conditions before we delve into a summary view of the proposed operating budget and proposed capital budget. Finally, we will look at what lies ahead and some specific dates for the current 2020 budget process. As a community, Beaumont has experienced tremendous growth and change over the last several years. This culminated in the decision to transition from a town to a city. This transition provides a great opportunity for us all to reimagine how we operate as a dynamic new city in the region. The proposed 2020 budget document Council has before them today is the start of how administration is reimagining the budget process and more broadly the finances of the city of Beaumont. This transition follows closely the approach numerous cities use, including Edmonton and St. Albert, and follows the best practices as set out by the Government Finance Officers Association. With this transition, there are certainly some differences between the 2020 budget document and what Council may have been provided in previous years. The look, feel, and organization of the document is slightly different, all done with the intention of hopefully making it easier for a non-financial person to read and understand. From a process perspective, we have removed any inclusion of potential carry-forwards from 2019 to 20. Administration is still intending to bring this information to Council for discussion, but instead of the budget process, the idea is to include it as part of the information discussed with the year-end surplus and financial statements. From a numbers perspective, there are a few changes, but one that may be most noticeable is the consolidation of what I term corporate revenues and costs into the CAO office, instead of having these costs spread throughout the departments. This is an interim step before a corporate department is created for the 2021 budget, but because the 2019 budgets have not been restated, there are some significant variances showing between 2019 and 20. There will also be some variances related to reorganization and the removal of some internal cost allocations that would have been previously shown in departments. 2020 budget is a transition year as we move to an updated financial cycle. Looking ahead in 2020, Council can expect to see some different information as part of the 2019 year-end process. Administration will also be providing quarterly financial updates, likely starting with the second quarter results. This will provide an opportunity to see how well administration is managing revenue and expenditures and see where we are forecasting to be overall at the end of the year and what the surplus may end up being. Finally, Council can expect that the 2021 budget process will continue to evolve and include some conversations on process with Council earlier in the year. The evolution of the budget document will also continue and will hopefully provide further alignment to the strategic plan, information on programs and services, and possibly some performance measures. As we are likely all aware, the economic environment we face today is significantly different than the environment that existed in the region for the past 10 years. Even though the city has continued to experience strong growth, we must keep in mind the economic realities when considering we're asking our residents to pay more in property taxes. To that end, it is important to understand that as at November 2019, the year-over-year rate of inflation for the Edmonton metro region was 2.1%. Further, the rate of inflation for the province is forecasted to be around 2% for 2020. In addition, several municipalities in the metro region have already approved their 2020 budgets and have set tax rate increases. These increases range from 0% with Leduc County to 3.9% for the town of Stony Plain. Overall, the average of these 12 municipalities is 1.8%. Should also recognize that even though the direct impact to Beaumont's budget has been minimal to date, the provincial government is taking a different approach with municipalities in Alberta and is asking us all to operate more efficiently with less. Considering these economic conditions, the proposed 2020 operating budget attempts to provide a balance between limiting property tax increases while managing expense increases that are required to maintain existing programs and services. The budget seeks to fund growth in services and programs to meet the needs of a growing population and advance Council's strategic plan and priorities, while keeping taxes affordable and user fees reasonable. To that end, administration has proposed a 2020 operating budget with a 1.7% tax increase. This is less than the projected CPI and slightly below the average of the increases already approved by neighboring municipalities. This rate increase has been achieved by identifying ways to operate more efficiently in order to maintain existing services, including not planning for a cost of living increase for staff, and not ask for additional dollars to continue to provide the same level of service as 2019. The physical growth of the city has implications for the operating budget as well. One benefit is the additional revenue from the expansion of the assessment base. Growth in the city means growth in the number of properties paying taxes. With this growth, there is also an increase in demand for services. For 2020, the most significant growth in service relates to the expansion of the Beaumont Sport and Recreation Center. The additional operating expense for the ESRC, along with some additional costs for new technology introduced for city administration, can be paid for with the additional growth revenue. There's even a small amount of revenue left to help offset costs proposed for service enhancements. The 1.7% increase does include a number of service enhancements that will be discussed further on the next slide. Finally, there is a minor tax increase related to funding requests from the library and the Leduc Regional Housing Foundation. As was already mentioned, included in the 1.7% tax increase are a number of items that result in a change to service. The items related to growth in service are listed at the top of the slide, and once again have been paid through the additional revenue that results from an increase to the assessment base. The items under the service enhancement title are ones proposed by administration and are directly funded through a tax increase. Further information on these initiatives can be found in the budget document, with the exception of the facility maintenance program. The intention of this item is to provide some ongoing operational funding that will allow us to complete the appropriate repairs and maintenance of city's facilities on an annual basis. For 2020, the plan is to complete work at the operations building and at the youth center. In future years, this funding would be available to do significant repairs for other city facilities on a priority basis. There are also two initiatives that have been proposed for funding in the utility operations. The first relates to inspection of water and wastewater mains, manholes, and catch basins, which will provide an update on the condition of these assets. The second is for a report that will provide a work plan to determine servicing strategies for water and wastewater systems. Both of these items are funded through utility rate revenue and have no impact on the proposed tax rate increase. In an effort to limit the tax rate increase to a reasonable number, there are several service enhancements that were proposed but have not been funded and therefore not included in the tax rate increase. If Council chose to fund any of these items, the proposed 1.7% tax rate increase could be impacted. The unfunded service enhancements are listed here, and additional information on each can be found on pages 20, 21, 22, and 23 in the budget document. As shown on page 7 of the budget document, the impact of a proposed 1.7% tax rate increase on a home valued at $440,000 is estimated to be an additional $58 for the year. There are also some proposed increases for water and wastewater services, which would result in an additional $25 per year, again, for the typical home. Switching the focus to the capital budget, this is about the stuff we build and maintain. It's about the new and renewal of roads, sidewalks, equipment, parks, and facilities that we use every day. It's a mix of maintaining the infrastructure we have and building the infrastructure we need, all in benefit of the citizens of Beaumont. The total proposed capital budget for 2020 is $8.5 million. If the additional $2.5 million proposed for the expansion of the BSRC is removed, the resulting amount of approximately $6 million is very similar to previous capital budgets. Not shown on this slide, but contained within the proposed capital budget, is one project that relates to utilities. This project is a renewal item that is requesting $70,000 be spent to complete some communication upgrades at pump houses located in the city. This item would be funded from the utility reserve and would not be competing with any of the other listed projects for funding. Similar to the operating budget, there are some capital projects that have not been proposed for funding. Unfortunately, the projects listed on the slide do not have a one-page capital project profile completed. So if there are any questions, please ask during the workshop discussions, and we will endeavor to provide council with the appropriate information. As the 2020 budget process moves forward, the profiles for these projects will be completed and included in an updated version of the budget document. In looking at the capital funding that is available, from the slide one can see that between grants and various reserves, there are significant dollars available. With the allocation of funding to the capital projects that have been proposed for 2020, there are still some significant balances for MSI and federal gas tax. MSI on the right-hand side of the column. MSI is $1.4 million available. Federal gas tax is $3.8 million available. In addition, there are still some balances available in the reserves. At this point, it is challenging to say with any certainty whether or not there is sufficient reserve funding to sustain our existing infrastructure. Based on some high-level analysis, the numbers do seem to suggest that there is a need to allocate some more funds to these reserves. Administration is planning to do some further analysis to determine what the appropriate amount should be, and will return to council later this year with a complete reserves report that will outline estimated contributions and 10-year replacement plans for each reserve or replacement program. It is also intended that the report will cover a proposed new reserve structure and policy. You may also notice a new funding source has been introduced in the 2020 capital budget. This is the last item on the slide, and it's called Pay-As-You-Go. This funding source has been created through a reallocation of existing dollars in the budget that were going to the infrastructure reserve. Utilizing the funding in a slightly different way does create some enhanced flexibility when it comes to funding some smaller items in the capital program, such as new equipment or public art that is currently part of the proposed capital budget for 2020. In terms of debt, looking at the room available, the city is in an improved position for 2020. The numbers on the slide account for the borrowing still required for the BSRC, including additional amounts proposed in the 2020 budget. The debt servicing calculations are also reflective of a significant payment that is scheduled to occur in 2020. Given these assumptions, the projected debt available at servicing room does provide some great additional flexibility in future capital budgets and as we re-examine our 10-year capital plan. Today's meeting is the start of the next phase of the 2020 budget process. Over the next few days, Council will have an opportunity to ask administration questions on the proposed budgets as well as the departments. Following the Council workshops, administration will make any necessary adjustments and prepare for some opportunities for the public to provide feedback on the proposed budget. The first date will be January 29th at the Community Centre. The second opportunity for public feedback will occur the following week, February 5th at Ken Nickel. Administration will then compile what we heard and return to Committee of the Whole on February 18th. Committee of the Whole will then discuss and send the budget to Council for approval at the February 25th meeting. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and we would now be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much for those opening comments and the additional information. So going back to the slide, so we have approximately $5 million, give or take, in unallocated MSI and gas tax fund money. Just want to make sure I'm reading that right.
Yeah, that's correct. Again, as I look at the slide on the right-hand side, that column to the furthest, right at the top, this is after the proposed capital projects have been funded. There is still just short of $1.4 million of MSI available and $3.8 million of federal gas tax available still.
Interesting. Open it up to questions from members of council on specifically the opening statements and any process questions you might have before we start diving down in. Questions from members of council? Councillor Danlon.
Thanks, Mike. Great introduction. Two questions, if you don't mind. You mentioned in your earlier comments, and chance to write it down before I go on the next comment, the range of other municipalities, tax increases. You mentioned Stony Plain and somebody else. What were your comments on that again, please? On the range of the already established budget from other municipalities?
Yeah, I think the point we're trying to drive home here, there is a significant range when you look at all 12 municipalities. You're going from 0 in Leduc County to 3.9 with the town of Stony Plain. If you look at the average of these 12, it comes out to the 1.8% rate increase. And what we've proposed at 1.7 is slightly below that. So given the 12 that we see on the screen, the 1.7 would be above average.
Okay, good. Second question, please.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. You mentioned staff salaries having no COLA. So is that to interpret there's no increases for staff in the 2020 budget? Because I'm looking at the various worksheets. I'm seeing some salaries and earnings are going up and some are going down on the various worksheets, but overall it's zero increase.
So overall, for cost of living adjustments, there are no cost of living adjustments contemplated for 2020.
Okay.
Within the budget, there are merit increases budgeted. So that would be based on performance of individuals. They would be, if individual employees are eligible, they are in the budget. The other thing that we've done within the budget around salaries is, as an efficiency, introduce what's referred to as a salary discount. So as an organization, we know there's a certain amount of turnover and vacancies that occur throughout the year. We've actually reduced the salary budgets in order to recognize that fact. And so you will see when you look at departments, some go up, some go down. It's a combination of merit increases, salary discount, and in some cases, like community services, we do have new FTEs built in there for the BSRC. So,
Okay. Clarification, if I could.
Sure.
So I think before your time, of course, but our first two budgets, 2018 and 2019, I believe the staff of the city of Beaumont got an increase of 2% each of those two calendar year or fiscal years. I believe they did, and memory's correct. Whereas last year, 2019, municipalities didn't give a full 2%. So we've done 2% 2 years in a row, which I think is pretty good. So you're suggesting it wouldn't be a straight 2% increase this year, 2020. Is that correct?
not from a cost of living perspective. Okay. There would be no cost of living adjustment this year.
Good. Thanks. That's good for now.
Councillor Mark Osman.
Yeah, thank you, and really appreciate the way it's laid out. It was very easy to go through and read, which I think you made an opening statement about non-financial people. I think you were directing that straight at me, so I appreciate that. Just a process question on how we're going to get through this document. Are we going through page by page here? Are we going through, like, if you just speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So I did have a chance earlier this week to review the tapes from last year. And seeing the tapes from last year, I definitely left with the impression that the approach was kind of a line-by-line review, going through the document from front to back. That was not my intention with bringing this forward to council. it's not an approach I'm used to. Typically, and I think the idea for me would be is to do this presentation, provide the information as Mr. Schwartz said at the opening. If there are pieces of information that are missing, then we will do everything we can to bring that to council. But it would be for council to, in some respects, walk through the document in a logical order, so by department, ask any questions that you feel you need some clarification on, and then hopefully have a conversation about what's been included in the 1.7% proposed budget and whether or not that aligns with what your feeling is around the budget. If there's things in there that you feel should be included, then have a conversation about that. And if there's things that have been included that you don't think should be there, then again, a conversation with regards to that piece of it as well. That is kind of how I've...
So I guess maybe I'll ask it this way. So you said you're not used to that process. Maybe share how it worked previously. I guess my concern is, someone's got a thought and then we're jumping into, capital, and someone wants to go back to operating, and then we're kind of jumping around and we'll look at debt limits, all this stuff. So I'm struggling to figure out the structure here. When I've got questions, obviously, and got a bunch of highlights and all that sort of stuff,
Sure.
and when to ask what questions without a structure, I think I might struggle.
Sure, fair comments. And I think what we tried to do is provide a bit of a structure, and it was a structure by department.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not that works in all cases is kind of to be determined, I guess. But from a structural standpoint, that is kind of how we've laid it out in terms of the first day today would be this kind of corporate presentation, any kind of questions of a corporate broader nature, and then asking questions alphabetically by department, essentially starting with council, CAO office.
Okay, that makes sense.
So on. And I think tomorrow is set up with the library, first off, coming in and providing a presentation as well, and then continuing on with the departments. So I think tomorrow we have scheduled infrastructure, planning and development, protective services, I think.
Okay, so there's, maybe not necessarily the need to go through, okay, we're on page 12, now we go to page 13, but we'll follow the logic of because the logic of the document makes sense.
Right.
I guess I would be, the concern would be, you're just like, okay, there's my presentation, who wants to talk about, and I want to dive into capital, right, straight away. So I know we want to walk our way through. So I appreciate that answer, and I think I'm comfortable with where we're going. The one comment I'll make, just for consideration, when we talked about departments, and I'm not going to ask questions on it, but when we talk about departments, all I see in front of me here is a spreadsheet, another spreadsheet, and then a pie chart. Previously, we had kind of a one-page commentary, hiring additional 3 staff here, and all that sort of stuff. So just curious on, clearly that was a choice to take that kind of commentary out. Just curious on your thoughts on why we did that.
Yeah, I think some of it relates to what I tried to address in the opening comments around what you're going to see as variances from one year to the next. Some of those variances are going to be consistent in each department. And as much as there's explanations for those variances, it would have been a challenge to fill out a page talking about the same kind of thing from one department to the next in terms of what's changed. The change pieces, I think we've, in this version of the budget document, located in more of the front pieces of the book. So when we talk about changes, what we're really talking about is service enhancements,
Sure.
or those growth in services pieces. Those are the changes. Otherwise, we've essentially maintained the budget from 2019 in 2020 on our existing services. So what I would call the base budget has stayed the same.
Yeah,
From
no,
a corporate
that's fair.
perspective.
The last comment I make, the genesis of my question or comment is, we get an opportunity to spend 3 days with you and ask our questions. Aside from the public doesn't, right? And they're probably not going to sit here and listen and hear all this sort of stuff. And so, when residents are interested in what's going on, just looking at this and seeing these huge shifts, which you're going to explain to us, right? They might not have that opportunity. And I realize that they could be here if they wanted to. But I felt last time that folks could just go through and read that one pager. So I understand that there's a bunch of flux and change. It might be hard to document it there, but I guess the concern is, the average resident who can't just look at this and sees things kind of moving all over the map. But I like your comment about that base budget piece, kind of carrying on with that and then adjusting the levels that way. So thank you.
Again, it's a fair comment, and the only other comment I would make is going forward, 21, you would see those kind of explanations on a department by department basis come back into the book for sure.
Cool. And just from my perspective, it was my intention not to go page by page, but we're to start with departments, be very high level, and then once we've been through all the departmentals, head back to those particular instances, like if you hit page 11, operating changes of service. So hit the ones that are funded, hit the ones that are unfunded. But without going through the departments, we don't have perspective. And so once we have the perspective, we can then start talking about what we're going to fund, what we're not going to fund, the capital that we're going to, and same thing with capital projects. We'll hit the capital projects we're going to fund, the capital projects we're not going to fund. But the intention is to get the high level overview in the next day, 2 days, hopefully however fast it takes us to get through it, before we start having major arguments about what we're listening at and what we're going to fund, it, what's in, what's out, what we want added, what didn't make the book. Councillor Stout, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Worship. Thank you, Mike, for the presentation. I found that very clear. I didn't feel I needed an accountancy class to understand what you'd actually said, so thank you. There was a couple of slides regarding unfunded expenses. Could you pop one of those back up? I think one was operating and one was capital, or do I misremember that?
Yeah, this is the operating unfunded.
Right. So that's what I wanted to ask was, so this is unfunded in the budget as presented here in the document. So if we decide that we want to do a City of Beaumont 125-year celebration for 30 grand, that is funded directly from taxes. And I think you alluded to that would then change the 1.7% tax increase by the corresponding amount. Is that all correct?
That would, excuse me, that would certainly be one option to fund that particular item. The other thing that I should point out, and I apologize because the numbers don't really reflect the actual ask here. The numbers on the screen show that it would be ongoing. I believe it is actually one time. And it's...
You can't have a 125-year celebration.
Yeah, right.
It's 3 years running, really, can you?
But you can't have an ongoing talk about a block party, but that's probably a conversation for tomorrow.
So I do think in the past there has been another funding option when one-time items have come up, and that's the mill rate stabilization.
Yes, that was what I was about to ask. Is an increase in tax the only way we can fund this? Or can I argue that a 125-year celebration is actually a one-off event and that could therefore come from reserves because without creating a structural deficit because we're not going to do it again?
That definitely there's some options on funding. It doesn't necessarily mean going onto the tax levy. There's another option that would possibly foresee council directing administration to find it within the existing budget as well. So there's a few different options that could be considered to fund something like that, or any other ones on this list.
And it also supposes that we didn't defund anything else that's currently funded.
That's correct.
Yes. Okay, so as we go through this document, we'll have the opportunity to address those questions, I assume, as part of the process that you were alluding to further. Great, thank you. That's really all I had.
Councillor Barnard.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for the presentation. It's very clear. Actually, I could read it in the time we had, which was a surprise to me because that's probably the first time ever I've read the whole budget document in one day. But that being said, I think it's for reasons that have been alluded to. As much detail as we've had in the past, we don't have. So I think you can expect quite a few questions about that, given how many highlights I've made. So just a heads up on that. My specific question was about pay as you go, and maybe I missed that somewhere. But you said that was a new source of funding. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Is that a reserve, or what is that?
Yeah, new source of funding, and it's not a situation where I'm just making things up here. Don't want to give that impression.
Magic money?
It is a funding source and a term that's commonly used within the municipal government world to fund capital. And all it really is collecting property tax revenue and moving that to capital. So using it for funding capital expenditures. And what we saw in the existing budget was we were already doing that essentially. We were doing that through a $1 million, essentially a revenue collected from property taxes that was being transferred to the infrastructure reserve. And so what I'm proposing, or what we've proposed through this budget, is instead of adding that to the infrastructure reserve, which would then be utilized again in the capital budget in some respect, we would just flip it to this pay-as-you-go as a funding source, so introducing another funding source that gives us some more flexibility is essentially what it does. If you think about public art as an example, typically something like public art, if we were using grant funding on a project like the BSRC, public art wouldn't be eligible as part of the grant. And so you'd have to find another funding source for that. Pay-as-you-go would be a logical option for something like that. There are some smaller items too, and using pay-as-you-go can create some efficiencies internally from an administrative standpoint. Instead of using grants to fund, a $50,000 tractor, where you would then have to report on it and do some administrative work. Again, we can use pay-as-you-go, pay for it ourselves essentially, and not have to go through that administrative process of grant reporting on a project of a smaller nature.
Just clarify.
Clarify, yeah.
If I understand correctly, the money that has in the past gone into what was called an infrastructure reserve was the excess of revenue over expenses?
It looked like it was a specific expenditure built into our operating budget that was then being collected from the property tax revenue.
For infrastructure specifically?
Or infrastructure, and then being transferred to infrastructure reserve. Where, again, in assuming past budgets, there would have been some projects funded from that reserve. This is where the whole reserve structure for the city needs to be analyzed further. Determine whether or not we have the right amounts. Determine whether or not we have the right reserve structure. It feels like we have too many reserves and need to consolidate some things. So that whole piece of work is yet to come. And for this budget, the proposal is to not do that transfer that would have been previously done.
That's why it drops down to the 10th. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just surprised by it because it was something I hadn't seen before. And at least you verified that I didn't sleep through the last budgets and miss it. It is new.
It is new.
Okay. I think I'll stop at those questions. Thank you.
Councillor Van Niekerk.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. It was very thorough. There was one piece you said in there about the removal of corporate costs from departments and consolidation under the CAO's office. Would you be able to just talk to that for a few more seconds, please?
Sure. And if I get stuck, I'm sure Mr. DeBlanco can help me out here. I think the biggest example of that is amortization. And so the city in the past was budgeting amortization throughout the departments. From a operational perspective, when you're looking at your revenue and expenses and you're trying to figure out and manage where you're at during the year, the amortization budget, as it was in the expenditure realm of accounts, and there was an offsetting transfer from equity from capital on the revenue side, it is just noise in order for you to manage your operations. And so rather than having that within the departments where it wasn't really of much value, quite honestly, the decision was made to pull it corporately and consolidate those budgets into one line, essentially. That would be your amortization budget for the corporation. Going forward, it wouldn't reside in the CAO office. I think there's a lot of corporate kinds of activities that are currently residing within the CAO office that need to be pulled out, and essentially what we would be doing is creating a separate department for corporate revenues and expenditures where all of those pieces would reside.
And then that would result in 572% increase there, because that's step 1 of 2.
Yeah, step 1 of 2, and next year hopefully we would do a bit of work on
some sub-accounts or something.
comparability. So we would do an adjustment for 20, so that you wouldn't necessarily see this 500 or 5,000% increase.
Yeah,
it would be more apples to apples comparison.
yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Councillor Danlick.
Actually, I just had another question. Let Sam go first, please.
Okay, Councillor
Thank
Margot
you.
Swain, followed by Councillor Danlick.
Thank you. Last couple of budgets, we had this thing called the Mill Rate Stabilization Fund. I haven't seen it in here. I'm not mad about that. I think it's kind of cheating, but could you explain the thought process? Is it in here? Maybe I haven't seen it, or is that kind of the pay-as-you-go kind of replacing that a little bit? Could you just speak to that?
Yeah, so I think the only place that it actually shows up in here, and I'll try and quickly find it, in the reserve schedule is probably in the capital section, page 70. There is, as part of the reserve piece, just all the operating reserves.
Yeah.
So they are shown as to where we're at, where we're projected to be in 2019 and then projected in 2020. In terms of funding anything from the mill rate stabilization, this budget does not contemplate that at all. Coming here, the mill rate stabilization as a funding source was something unique to me as well. My experience with something similar is more along the lines of using that reserve to fund unexpected revenue decreases. So a good example is the BSRC. We're closing the BSRC for a certain amount of time. Rather than adjusting your budget, what you could do is use your operational stabilization reserve to smooth out that decrease in revenue for the 1 year, knowing full well it's going to come back the following year. So you don't get that dip in your budget. The flip side is on these one-time operating projects that can get funded, the mill rate stabilization was used. As much as possible, and don't get me wrong, that could still be a mechanism for council to fund some of those things. Still there, still available. On a one-time basis, it's not a bad thing, but it's not something that I would necessarily recommend.
Yeah, and you're being very careful with your words here. I appreciate that, being you and all that sort of stuff. You use the word unique, so I'll leave you with that. But I always felt, we'd look at it and like, well, it's from this mill rate stabilization fund, so it doesn't really impact us. And so, yeah, I use the word kind of cheating. And it just felt like there were these things that would come up and, well, it's out of this fund, right? But ultimately, it still has an impact to the taxpayer, but this is the way it was kind of presented. So I never never quite understood that. So I'm glad to see that. Obviously, we'll see what everyone else thinks, but I'm personally glad to see that not be front and center of some of these ways to pay for some of these operating projects. So I was curious on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the other thing I'd add is that when we bring forward the reserve analysis, review, and policy, I think what you'll see there is a different kind of flavor on how to use that mill rate stabilization reserve. If you think about something like snow clearing as an example, your snow clearing, I mean, it's totally weather dependent. You can flatline that budget to a certain extent, but in extreme situations, you're going to go over budget possibly. Mill rate stabilization would be a mechanism to offset some of those additional costs.
To stabilize it, if you
To
will.
stabilize it, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Danlick.
Thank you, Worship. Just a quick question on page 8, operating budget. I'm just curious, on the expense side, that's where all the money is going in the various departments. Does the operating budget actually have a component to contribute to reserves in any way or form? I'm not seeing it there. Am I correct in that assumption that the 1.72% proposed tax increase would look after operating and capital as presented, but would not actually contribute any new money to any reserves? Is that correct?
Sure. So I'll direct your attention to page 10,
Okay.
which shows number 67, about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the bottom, shows what our reserve expense would be for the year. Slight dip from the prior year. Some of that has to do with what we're doing with pay-as-you-go. The other piece I would direct your attention to would be on the revenue side, transfer from reserve. 2019, approximately $3 million. 2020, approximately 6.1. Little clarification on the increase there is the $4.5 million repayment for the loan for the piece of land on, I believe it's Township 505, that historically for the last 2 to 3 years, the surplus at year end was transferred to that with the intent to pay that amount off in March here, actually.
That's 8 acres, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it is. Okay. Okay, I think I had my question answered. I'm not 100% sure, but I'll make it back to you if I have a follow-up. Thank you.
Okay. Actually, Bill skipped ahead to the next section, which was start with the operating expenses. So just, I'm perfectly willing to carry on with this conversation if council's ready to go forth and start asking these questions. Yeah, so that's where I'm at. So are we done? So we've hit the structure, we've hit the overhead. We're starting to dive into the operating budget, and I'm happy to do so if everybody's ready and comfortable with moving forward. So we're ready. Okay, let's start with, well, good place to start is page 8. Gives us the overhead. So we'll start with the overall view, and then we'll just hit the highlights starting in the departments on page 28 after that. So let's hit page 8 and dive right in. So is there questions from members of council, or do you want to have a quick 5-minute preamble just to sort of run the page down? And
I'm good if to dive right into questions. So.
Okay. Councillor Danlick, you started it. Are you ready to keep going? Or? Sure, have at her.
Have at her. So, fourth down from revenue, government transfers for operating, 2.8 down to 2.1. Is that completely due to the change in MSI funding from the province, or are there other components that make that number less? I saw a couple of places in the back of the report, but I'm not too sure if I did the math myself to figure out if that entire 675 is purely MSI, or is something else, MSI plus something else makes 675? I think there's more than one thing there, I think.
So the bulk of that decrease is due to the change in how we're funding the debt servicing for the rec center. So in the 2019 budget, we had a budget amount of roughly $590,000 attributed to funding for debt servicing for the rec center. Mm-hmm. So what that does is pull that capital funding source, MSI, and move it over into the operating budget. The intent of using the franchise fees to pay for the debt servicing for the rec center decrease that amount that we would be using for MSI.
Okay.
So of the 607, approximately in that $500,000 range is attributed to that. The roughly 100K not accounted for there would be various small grants that were mostly one-time projects in 2019.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Goswin?
Yeah, thank you. Page 8, draw your attention to the rental income. Just curious, obviously we've got half a year of the new rec center here. I remember that when the presentations were coming in front of us, they were looking at kind of 80% ice time and, in terms of cost and all that sort of stuff and what we think how much would actually be used. And when I first looked at it, it looked very conservative in terms of how much space that would actually be rented out and all that sort of thing. I'm just curious, do we go back and re-look at that? Or are we just assuming those numbers for the rec center?
So for rental income on page 8, there is a bump there. Some of it is attributable to the Kovic Center as a new rental revenue source. So that would, I believe, approximate $100,000. There's some additional rent revenue budget there for the community center as well. As far as the rental revenue specific to the ice time, I would refer back to.
Yeah, it could be a question when we get
Yeah.
into that side of things. I was just maybe I'll tip my hat for that, but I remember 18 months ago looking at it, it was very conservative, and I thought we could be realising a lot more. So just curious how that folded into this. So I'll wait until we get down there. Thank you.
Councilor Van Newkirk?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just moving one line down to the licenses, permits, and fines. Just high level, if you could explain the reduction there. I think I know what it is, but if you would explain that, that'd be good.
At the highest level, licenses, permits, and fine would be a decrease, I believe, from things like building permits, development, current planning related. Once again, I'd direct the specifics back to member admin at the back of the room.
What I had in mind was a decrease in photo radar revenue.
Oh.
I wondered if that fit in that category.
Yes, that would as well.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Barnett?
Thank you, Your Worship. Not getting too much into the weeds, I won't do that, but on this page I see some significant changes in the CAO office, and that might be what you were talking about before in terms of where costs are being allocated. But I'm looking to see kind of how that plays out, like where is the corresponding decrease and increase, et cetera, and infrastructure shows up. And then I'm wondering about the pay-as-you-go explanation. So could you just give me a little bit of an overview here as to why some have significantly gone up and some down?
Yeah, certainly what you're seeing there in the CAO office as an increase is primarily related to the amortization. And again, Mr. DeBlanco can correct me if I'm off here, but it's roughly about $8 million for amortization that got shifted into the CAO office. The biggest component of where you'd see the decrease is definitely in infrastructure. And so the $5.6 million decrease again would be related to that transition from departments into the CAO office of the amortization expense specifically.
Just more on that. If we want to look specifically at CAO office, I know Mike will appreciate this. If we factor out the amortization, there's actually a net decrease in terms of direct expenses.
Say that again?
So if we look at the CAO office specifically and factor out this non-cash item, amortization, which for the non-financial folks is depreciation, life cycle of assets, whatnot, there's a net decrease from 1.3 million on direct expenses down to approximately, if I do fast math, 1.1.
Okay. Got me there. You good? Councillor Stout?
Thank you, Worship. Just like to direct your attention to page 9. I really like the graphical presentation there, and that's probably because for the last two budgets I've asked for exactly that to be put in, so thank you for that, I appreciate it. And the reason I like it is because it makes it immediately clear where the big expenditures are, where the big changes are at a glance, at least to me. And in fact, looking at that, if we look at the budget expenses comparison at the bottom, CAA office shows a big hike, which is exactly what you which I assume is exactly what you just described with the amortization, and the size of that hike almost exactly matches the decline in infrastructure. So yeah, I can see straight away that something has been transferred from one department to another in terms of the increases. Great, really like that. Thank you.
Councillor Donlett?
Thank you, Worship. If I may, back to page 8 for a moment. On community services, we're showing a change of essentially $2 million in community services. I'm referring down then to page 31, which is the community services breakdown operating budget, and I'm assuming that some of the decrease in revenue has to do with the pool being closed for the first half of 2020 in terms of revenue and that sort of thing, but there should be also a corresponding decrease in expenses. So I'm wondering why the revenue or part of the expense difference is 1.2 million. I couldn't get the math to add up to 1.199. I couldn't find where on page 31, if that's where I'm supposed to look for it, to get the 1.199.
Yeah. So on page 31, I'll direct your attention to, in the expenses section, we have 3 headings there: internal costs, other, reserve, and debenture expense. So kind of, I'd say 6 lines up from the bottom, there's an other total. And the change there is 1.199.
Right.
So this section, which I would maybe next time around title direct expenses, right here it says other, that's actual dollars and cents cash being transferred. Things like internal costs, reserve, and debenture expense are more accounting in nature, whereas this middle section would be the, once again, direct expenses managed by the operational folks. So that's why that is broken out like that. As you can see, as we alluded to before, much like infrastructure, community service has a large capital component too. So removing that amortization is a big, or accounts for $1.25 million of where the change is there.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Van Newkirk?
Yeah, just wondering if, am I able to move a couple pages ahead? Page
I
10?
got one last question on this one, and then you can
Sure.
do it. Looking for the borrowing for the BSRC, I noticed there's debentures of $8 million in 2019, $8 million in 2020. Where are we actually going to land with what we actually have to borrow to complete that project? Because I'm not seeing $30 million. Sorry, $26 million. Yeah.
Sorry, just repeat the question just so I know where we're looking here.
I'm wondering where to find the total debenture borrowing for the Beaumont Sports and Rec Center, because I'm not seeing it show up in here.
You want the total amount?
Or is that,
Or the debt servicing?
or the debt servicing for it? Sorry, that's where I'm at.
So the actual total amount would be on page 68.
Oh, so I'm early, is what you're saying? Okay.
And that's the loan itself.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'll get back to that when we get back to that section. All right. Skipping along, if there's no further questions on that, we'll skip along to page 10 and then move into departments. Sort of the intention is to go with departments in order, but if there's a specific one burning in your back of your heads, then we'll do that. So page 10, Stephen, Councillor Van Newkirk, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I believe you had explained quickly earlier here a couple of things. I just want to look for some clarification specifically on 1999-7, the transfer from reserve. If I heard you correctly, that is transferring money forward from reserve to work on expense number 69, which is the payment of the parcel. Is that correct? That's the in and out of that. And then 17813 franchise and assessment contract. Can you explain the increase there, please?
So the increase in franchise and concession contracts is directly exactly the franchise fees with AltaGas and Fortis. So the increase that last year, budget deliberations 2019, was approved a halfway step to an average of comparable municipalities April 1. The second phase-in was as of January 1, so that would be the increase there.
So the difference is the increase of those two steps. Thank you.
That's correct.
Further questions? Okay, seeing none, so if we flip to page 28, start. Go ahead.
Still an update there, pardon me. Just a follow-up to Steve's question. So at the bottom on number 69, debenture principal, that 6.9 million, is that the amount of the payout for that 80 acres parcel, or it'll pay out this year, but there's more to pay out? Just clarify that 6.9 if you could.
So the 6 point, if first I'll draw your attention to the 2019 column, this would be a normal year, given our current loans that we have is 2.4 million on debenture principal, 1.3 on the interest. The large increase there is 4.5 million, paying back the principal on that loan, and then that loan is done.
And it's just retiring the loan.
All the other ones we have are paid semi-annually. This particular one was full principal, pay the interest throughout the term, and then pay the full principal back.
So it was basically a balloon payment, simply
Yes,
paid interest for 3 or 4 years, and made principal outlay, which would be this year 2020.
That's correct.
Thank you.
So that actually frees up $4 million on our debt room in one fell swoop.
That's correct.
Nice. Okay, further questions on the front end?
Versus, you want to skip to the departments, we're going to come back and talk about funded.
Well, yeah, we'll come back. Look, I want to get the high-level overview, so we'll go through, get the perspective on what's going on in the departments and what's there, which will give us the ability to have a coherent conversation about pages 11 on. Right?
So we're switching tabs.
We're switching tabs. We're heading to page 28. We're talking about. We'll start with council's budget because it's first on the order. And so council is actually experiencing a bit of a slight reduction. $5,500. Is that? And where's that coming from? No more change. Well, somebody keeps messing with my chair anyway, so. Amortization?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, okay, there is $6,800 in amortization. I don't know what we were amortizing, but.
That's my question.
Yes. Yeah, you're out. Okay. Sorry. Slate. All right, so basically we're essentially status quo from 2019 to 2020 then is the way I read this.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Questions from members of council? Councilor Moncasway.
Just curious around the travel and training budget. I see that's been consistent for quite a while for us. I know that you have done a lot of work to cut back through your departments, and just curious if we should be having that conversation about with us. I don't know how close we came up to that bar or how, without seeing the actuals. I'm curious if you know that or if you can find that.
I had a glance at it today. I want to say it's in the $26,000 range. Once again, caveat being year-end process is still here. Could be some adjustments, but I don't imagine it would be to the tune of that. But
Yeah, I guess.
don't quote me on the number.
No, you're good. I guess what I'm going with here is, if we're not getting close to it, do we still need to keep that across, or is there room here for us to potentially drop our travel and training down?
Could we perhaps average the last 3 years and sort of land at the middle?
Yeah, we could do that.
You don't just have to do it right this second as we talk.
We can make that adjustment once we can come back tomorrow and look at what the number
if you
be.
would maybe just give us an overview of what our actuals have been, and to see how close this is. I think we should, administration has done it, so we should take a look at it ourselves. It was just my thoughts. The other question I had, line 60 down there, expenses, these community grants.
Yeah.
Where is that? What is that?
I believe my understanding is this was a pot of money dedicated for council to give out funds to whatever organization they would want to contingency.
Yeah. Yeah. Was my impression though that once we consolidated the grants into a common funding that this goes. So it goes into the common grant funding pot, so that we're not doing this anymore. So this should have been part of the money that brought into the grant funding policy as of last year. So. Yeah. Good question. Yeah. Well, I don't think we need to increase the community grants, but I think we're adequate. Yeah. Of course, yeah. Yeah, no, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's where we're at, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so. Yeah, no, because that 15 grand doesn't need to be there, because we have a community grants policy, which everybody's supposed to be going through, so. Good catch. Fees, expenses. CAO.
Just to clarify, because this is a good turning point in the processes, Councillor Markov Swain just suggested a couple changes. I don't know where we landed on the travel training. Was it we were going to further review and come back to you?
Yeah, I guess I didn't want to debate it until we would have the numbers. I think, is that
fair enough. But this next one is 15,000 that I'm seeing heads nodding saying, pull it from this line, plain and simple. So
yeah.
From a process perspective, and I guess I'm going to rely to you, Mike, because I know you're building the process for 2021. What's the best way to do this?
Yeah, without being too rigid, I guess. I think it would be useful for everybody to have some clarity around these things. So if there is something like the community grants that has been raised as a potential item to be removed, that actually be, I don't know if it's appropriate to vote on it, but I do think it is useful to have at least consensus from council that be the direction to administration.
Sure, we can do that. The question I have on this specific item, though, is are we voting to remove a line item, or are we making a correction that we thought we'd already did last year?
Regardless, in the 1.7 and then the budget that we're presenting, the 15 is there.
Is there plus the grants,
so
right?
You're making.
Okay, so we can make a quick. They're not binding because the final budget document is binding, but we can. It's very easy for us to make a motion and provide some clarity and consensus. If council's okay with that. Okay. You're talking about it, Councilor Van Nieuwkerk.
I just wanted to 100% make sure that the administration was agreeing that this was, in fact, the case, that the community grant funding policy would be the mechanism, because it is, and that this 15,000 should go over there. I haven't seen heads nodding up and down in administration that is the in fact piece of truth there.
And my understanding is it's not going over to the community grant. It's an oversight in that we set the amount last year. Council set it last year with the direction, and I must have missed it, to remove the 15 that's sitting in your account. So this 15, I'm hearing, is being removed from the budget, which effectively takes a 1.7 into a 1.67 right at this point in time.
Yeah, so if we have a community grants budget that is X,
That is set. That's my
already in the
understanding.
budget. We don't need to take 15K and put that on top of that.
That's not what I'm hearing.
Okay.
But if that's what you want to do, that's entirely up to you.
No,
No,
that's not where I was
it's not
going.
where I wanna go.
What I wanted to hear is what you said is affirmation that is, what we've batted around is in fact. So that's good. Second piece here is it may be one of the things we've done in times past is kept track of ups and downs in a little table or something. If you recall, you pop yourself an Excel table and, this date we've done this and this was an increase and then all of a sudden we're going to do a decrease and then, so that we can keep track of our decisions here. So come end of this workshop, we have somewhat organized our thoughts on where we land.
Very good idea.
So just, I don't know if the administration is amenable to that or what you were thinking on how to track things. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I think we have the file set up to do exactly that, track it through an Excel document, which we can do. And, it might be useful at the end of the meeting or at the start of the next meeting just to flip that file up on screen and make sure everybody's comfortable with what we've tracked.
No,
And then that will give us some validation that we do have captured everything.
Councillor Barnett?
Thank you, Your Worship, and I think you're going towards where I was hoping we'd go. I would have difficulty right now proving just to take it out and reduce the tax increase, because I've seen some things in the unfunded list that I think we should reconsider, and it would make more sense to me to make a list of the things that we're saying maybe we could reduce or we could take out, and then also have the conversation when we see it all as to which things we might fund and where we might get that money. I'd rather move things around. If we can reduce the taxes, that's a bonus, but I wouldn't want to make the decision now.
Just
It's too
clarification,
detailed.
we're not actually, if we did nothing else, it would reduce the tax increase. But by the time we're right where you're at. By the time we get through adding stuff that's funded, other line items, that tax increase will move as we do that throughout the whole budget. It's not necessarily that we're allocating it to a tax decrease.
That process wasn't made clear to me, so that's why
Yeah,
I'm just
clarifying
stating
now,
it, that I don't want to see this decision be made that I'm against it or not. I just want to
No.
see it as, this is where we are now, we think this is something that could come out,
Yeah.
but I
so-
also see the city celebration as something that should go in.
Yes.
Exactly what I was going to.
Yeah.
My intent in this was if we could find 15K in the travel and training, we could find that 15K from community grants. There, that thing is right. So we reduce council budget to pay for the type narrative, right? So, but I totally agree.
Yeah. But no, it's,
I'm not saying
yeah.
yes, get rid of it.
The pluses and the minuses need to be tracked.
Yeah, we're just trying to track the pluses and minuses and then where we land with the tax increase. And if we don't like where it lands, we may be having further discussions. So,
Okay.
but yeah, so don't worry about the tax increase. Just worry about whether you want it in or out, and then we'll see where it lands, and then we'll go through it again if we have to. Correct, and we'll just do it by motion, make a quick motion, and then do it quick by hands, because I don't want to. We can be out of it a lot, so we'll just do it the old-fashioned way by hands, rather than on the machine, and we'll just go from there. Is everybody okay with that process?
Because just to build off of that, then we bring the spreadsheet back. At that point in time, you can make a formal motion to accept the changes, the ups and downs, and the reallocations as per. And I confused you, but I used that as an example just to try and clarify that the 15 was coming out and not already, or sorry, not added to the other budget. So yeah, if we can do a show of hands, and I know I'm looking at him because he's already suggested a process for next year that is going to be more formal, and we just couldn't pull it together quick enough, and we'll get rid of that confusion. So this will work.
All right, so I'll make a motion that we pull the community line 60 community grants, $15,000, pull it out of the council budget. All in favor? Aye. So there you go. That one's gone. CAO's on. Are we done? Sorry, I'm done. Are we done with council budget for now until we get that information? CAO's office. Okay, I'm still confused how the CEO gets $8 million. Sorry, I'm just kidding. So yeah, just so hitting the highlights once again. CAO's office gets hit. All the municipal taxes come in as revenue, and then it gets portioned out from there. Just so I'm reading this correctly.
Yeah, essentially the tax revenue does all flow into the CAO office. And so you're seeing at the bottom an overall revenue generation, so to speak, for the CAO office, which goes to the overall city budget at the end of the day.
And I know we've covered it before, but the increase in direct expenses from 1.3 to 8.7 is strictly amortization, or mostly amortization. Questions from the members of council? Councillor Stout.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I was going to mention the same thing. When I get these, I look down the percentage change columns and see what the big hitters are either way. And it's not very often I see an increase of 12,360%. In fact, I'd think very carefully about what that actually meant. But I've highlighted it and was going to ask you questions as to it, but you've already dealt with them, right? It's just a different accounting treatment of how this particular expense is, or which department this particular expense is allocated to. And
Absolutely correct. Yes.
Great. Thank you. That's all I had to say. Like I say, I don't often see an increase of 12,360% of anything.
Well, I gotta admit, when I was going through this and I saw 12,360% increase, that was a question on my radar. But no, that's awesome. So CA's office, everybody's happy and no questions on the overall CA's office budget? Because now you haven't had a lot of time to spend on the books, I'm giving some time to have another quick look. You're still on, yeah, go ahead.
So, Mike, you spent a bunch of time in 2019 kind of restructuring your organization, and I've done that, and I think it's fair to say you're done that. Would that be fair? I guess, again, without a narrative, not knowing other shifts and potentially coming back for new positions within that organization structure. Can you just speak to the human side of things?
Sure. In the 2020 budget, there are no additional positions outside of the bringing up the BSRC. As an organization, loosely call us an evolutionary organization. It's a new term. We're going to continue to look at opportunities to get better. And if that includes meeting people or doing work differently, then we'll come back to council with those proposals. But at this point in time, we're looking at some stability and looking forward to that in 2020 and 21.
Cool. Thank you.
Councillor Van Niekerk?
Yeah, thank you. Just to build on that, as we flip through all these departments, the salaries and wages, it looks like you've added half a person here and taken away and added 6 people and all that, but that's just shuffling. That's more of an accounting exercise, shuffling money from one department to another, and I think that overarching narrative the CAO just provided, shall be the guidance so that we don't have to keep revisiting the salaries and wages on each of these departments. So, yeah, thank you.
No, fair enough. Councillor Stout?
Thank you. Could you just talk to him? I was so overwhelmed by 12,000% that I missed the 2,500% transfer from reserve, 19997. Could you just speak to why that's gone up to the extent that it has? Is that the same thing, or is that something different?
Yeah, so that transfer from reserve going up $4.5 million, that's strictly pertaining to that repayment of the land debenture.
The 80 acres on 505.
That's correct.
Great, thank you.
So not only does he get all the revenue, but he gets stuck with the big bill too.
Makes sense.
Fair enough. He's stuck with me. All right, so seeing nothing further on the CAO's office, community services. Councillor Varner.
Thank you, Your Worship. We talked about travel and training for council, and I'm wondering what the significant difference is in this budget for travel and training.
In 2019, once again, this might be a exercise in accounting and allocations. Mm-hmm. In the 2019 budget, the travel and specifically training budgets were held at the general manager level. So all the sub-departments underneath community and protective services, integrated growth and infrastructure, and corporate services were the 3 large departments at the time. Those departments would have held all the training for the operational departments below. As we no longer have that structure anymore, this training budget has been moved down to the operational departments.
Follow up, go ahead.
So overall, travel and training in the in the entire corporation? Would you say it's gone up, stayed the same, up slightly? Any idea? If you added it all up, what has changed? Flat?
Yeah, it would have, since we were basing it back to 19, it would have stayed approximately the same.
Okay, thank you for that.
Further, Councilor Margot-Smith?
I might use this quite a bit. Seeing as we've only got a couple of days ago, I'm going to have another dumb question here. Community services. So this is where the 14 new staff for the rec centre come in. So I would have expected, an increase in salaries and wages, increase in training, all that sort of stuff. Why is that not there?
So I can speak to the salaries part. I might ask Community Services Director to speak on the specifics of it, but correct me if I'm wrong, if Jan 1 we ceased operations within the center, casual wage staff would have been removed for there, so there'd be 6 months of time there where that staffing level would be down. So that would offset the increase of 14 FTEs for a hiring date estimate of July 1. So we're essentially decreasing staff for 6 months, and then we're increasing it back.
And so I understood that. Understand that. I just thought we were decreasing less staff than we were adding more staff post July. So I thought. I mean, obviously you're listening to the numbers, but I just thought that if you take away your part-time staff at this point, that they're going to come back as well as the 14 full staff. I just thought there would have been more need in that, and I see a reduction here. Does that question make sense?
Yeah. So once again, two pieces. We're at significantly less staff for 6 months, and then we're at more staff for the second half is how we budgeted. We budgeted the 14 FTEs at a half year, so essentially 7 FTEs. And then the other piece of that would be the salary discount that Mr. Dowler alluded to earlier. Just giving acknowledgement to the fact that there is attrition, there's turnover,
Sure.
There's periods of time where staff aren't hired. I would also add that there's other departments within community services outside of the rec center, so there could be components of that as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I trust the numbers there. Would it be fair to say 2021 we could expect to see that number go a lot higher?
Absolutely.
Mr. Studer, I see your head nodding. Did you want to chime in a little bit here? Or are you good?
Well, I won't speak to the accounting side of it, but that's in a nutshell.
Thank you.
CEO?
Just to build on the last comment about expecting it to rise next year, as Mr. Dowler had explained, we fully expect growth to cover that and to not be on the backs of the tax rate. So that's something that's built in the narrative of this budget as another good news story, is that BSRC can effectively come up full time in 2021 and not be a burden to the tax rate.
And if I'm remembering correctly, considering when we approved this project, we were projecting possible 10% tax increases, so that definitely is a good news story to be able to fund that through growth. Follow up?
Yeah. Slight change of tack, but still on our favourite topic, the rec centre. Previously we had from Leduc County, we were getting $25,000 in operations that they were transferring over to us. Now we negotiated the $150,000 with them, along with their capital investment. I'm just assuming that's in here.
That's right.
Could you just point to where that is?
That would be within the government transfers for operating.
So that's what I was looking at. I assumed they were a government, but again, seeing that reduction there, that surprised me. But does that have to do? I guess we're getting 125,000. So where are we losing? Where are we losing 200 and X?
I would have to relook at the specifics of the variance.
Yeah, and to be fair, it's probably not pertinent. I just want to make sure that the 150 was in there, and you're saying it is. So thank you.
Councilor Nickert?
Down to expenses on line 60 there, so the 225, so that is the proper place for the community grant funding policy allocation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
There's more than the community grants policy within that 225.
Oh, okay. What does that comprise of?
I will pull it up right now. So that would be the 50,000 for Blues and Roots, the Art Society, as well as
The Ag Society and Heritage Society.
Heritage Society. Okay, it's that whole piece. Okay.
60 community grants.
And we maintained those at status quo.
That's correct.
Right, they got, and what, just quickly, it was 50 for the 50 for the Blues and Roots, 45 or 50 for the Art Society.
So currently 70,000 for the grants policy, 5,000 for the Ag Society, 50 for the Society for the Arts, 50 for Blues and Roots, 50 for the Heritage Society, as well as 35K for some recreational scholarships.
Recreation scholarships.
Correct back.
That's a new one.
Sorry, $30,000 for a low-income recreation subsidy.
Oh, that's not new. We've done that before. Okay. Yeah, I like it.
And
Scholarship's
sorry,
good.
5,000 for some small scholarships, trophies, and awards.
Yeah.
Same as 2019 status.
Yeah, fair enough. So we didn't get anything new. So I guess now's a bit of an appropriate time to ask council, when we provided direction back in December that we were going to maintain status quo on granting to those organizations, is that still where your head's at? And we can revisit it again tomorrow if you want to think about it. Councillor Barnard, sorry.
Thank you, Your Worship. Before answering that question, could we review what they've asked for? Because I think we've had requests from the groups, have we not?
Not specific. The only one I can think of specifically was the arts, and that's coming up. That their extra 85.9 is coming up.
It's in the unfunded piece,
Course.
and there were no other requests for increases.
I would have to go back to admin. Like the Ag Society, the Heritage Society didn't come. They're all happy. Councillor Montgomery.
So I know we're going to get to the unfunded in a little bit. I just wanted to confirm with the Arts Society, some of the unfunded was the dollars for the feasibility study, I want to say, for the Arts Centre. Is that considered within the unfunded piece? Didn't see.
If I remember correctly, there is, and somebody's going to have to correct me, but I believe there's an unfunded piece portion for that.
There is. It just the math didn't add up. I definitely saw the unfunded section, and so maybe we wouldn't skip to get to it, but it was 100. I know it was 150K. And so in the Art Society, the unfunded section. So I'm going to take you back to page 11. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, that's not got the feasibility study.
That's my question.
Is it in the capital? I don't see it. Okay, so we're going to have to make a note because we're going to have to talk about that.
And maybe we talk about it as part of the unfunded. Just
Yeah, we'll talk about it during the unfunded. We're not going to talk about it now. Correct. Yes.
we go through unfunded.
Yeah, when we go through when we hit the operating changes to services and we talk about those projects that are funded and the ones that are unfunded, and if it's not currently in the budget, we will add it and have a discussion about it. So that will be feasibility study will be one of those ones we're going to have a chat about. Councillor Van Niekerk.
Yeah, thank you. And you asked the question about what we thought about those amounts, and I was just going to suggest that probably we have that conversation after we're done reviewing everything, rather than, I don't know. It seems to be we might be putting the cart ahead of the horse if we start talking about that when later on we may want to add or delete or whatever. So I don't know.
No, fair enough. I'm happy for now, but my opinion may change once we get further in. That's fine too.
That's all I was thinking, is that the farther we get in, and I think we make a note to circle back to it, and but just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Yes, no, fair enough. I am making a note. Councillor Down?
Thank you. I think Steve's suggestion is a good one on that particular topic, so I would agree with that, to
Okay.
come back to it. My other question was in relation to the Leduc County's contribution to the Recreation Center operating budget. 150,000 was a huge negotiation our council was able to achieve with them. Is it possible to have it as a separate line item, just to clearly identify it in the categories, as opposed to not bearing it but having it somewhere else where it's not quite so easily recognizable? Because that was a huge achievement for us.
Yeah, but it's also that 125 now has been incorporated into the cost share agreement, which now is a number of like 260 or more.
Right.
Yeah.
So that cost share agreement gets spread out throughout multiple departments, so there's other components that would be spread out throughout the document.
Okay, I can live with that. I just thought it'd be nice for to sort of recognize that achievement because it was significant for help us with our operating expenses. But if it can't be easily broken out, I'm okay with that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you and Councillor Monkoff-Swain did an excellent job in that negotiation. All right, so any further questions, comments about community services? All right, it being my computer shut off, sorry. It being 7:10 and we've now been sitting for an hour and 20, we're going to call a 5-minute break and then we'll continue on. let's call the meeting back to order. It's 7:30. We'll continue on. We're scheduled to be out of here at 9. Depending on how it goes, are we prepared to stay to the bitter end tonight? Perhaps get out of here early tomorrow night? Or do we go on? Well, we're scheduled to be here till 9. Well, we're not going to go past 9 o'clock. Good point. Yep. Yeah, first time work till 9 and be done. But. Okay. So, moving on. Economic development and communications. Councillor Van Newkirk, you ready to go? Okay.
With here, I think. Yeah, thank you. I've received the question in the community a little bit as of late about the current posting that there is out for a position in the economic development and communications realm. Just wondered if administration could speak to that and how it's funded. We had heard that the staffing levels were going to be status quo yet that posting was out. Just looking for some narrative on that, please. Thank you.
CEO?
Yeah, the money for that position is in the 2019 budget and was a result of some restructuring. So the posting has gone from 219 to 220. We can absorb it within the current 219 budget levels, and that's our intention. Talk a little bit. It's more than just touching. And I'm going to toss it over to you in a second, Rob. It's more than straight economic development, and I'd like Rob to, I think, fill him in, please.
So it was a position that was budgeted for 2019 and we had not filled it. We are trying to build. It's going to be that concierge that will also it will work closely with planning and development and some of the front end discussion of potential projects. And so we'll be working closely with Kendra's team. So that will look out for that to cultivate the concierge, but making sure that one-stop shop when we project comes to see that individual with economic development team as well as that front end knowledgeable person and use, etc.
Sorry. I didn't realize it was going to go that loud. Follow up? We're all good?
No, that's good.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you. Quick question on line 20. Salary and wages increased 82%. I'm assuming that's also part of having communications brought under this department. But I couldn't kind of figure out where communication was elsewhere to be taken away from. So can you walk me through some of that?
Sure. So partial communications would still exist within the 19 budget. That was
right.
Apples to apples in that sense. The addition would be part of the restructure with some additional analysts that speak on them, I guess.
So there was that individuals that, as part of the reorganization or reorganization, came over with reporting to the departments and they're currently business analysts. So they're supporting the entire organization, business cases with the projects and efficiencies. So we have those two individuals that were part of that change as well.
So where did they come from? Which of the departments?
They were underneath the general manager function.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
CEO?
I just want to build on, we've also, as you know, expanded the communications and marketing department, and what we did is took a long-range planner, I'm going to say, somebody from planning, and forewent that position in 2019 and transferred into one other one. So we'll represent more of that.
And so linking this straight back to the strategic plan, because economic development and communications were two major pillars and concerns of council, this is the build-out of the team to deliver the services that we're now enjoying. Nice. Councillor Barnard.
If you wouldn't mind just commenting on the revenue decreases that have occurred in this particular section, what's that specifically?
So the revenue decreases, I'm assuming you're looking at the second section of revenue transfer from surplus to reserve.
Yeah.
So the transfer from reserve line goes from 668,000 to 8,900. Those 668,000 in transfers from reserves were for one-time projects. One of them being Ella, some of it being for the rebranding and Quebec.
So then the initiative money that we had is still in the budget, but that was additional revenue that was being used towards those projects? Because I know we have initiative money in the economic development budget. Maybe just a little, enlighten me a little bit on that, I'm just a little confused.
So those projects between the corporate rebranding last year, the Yellow project, as well as the COVID project, equal approximately that amount. And those are one time. So what you see is the initiatives project is separate. It's basically a package to meet that. And that's for some of the planning around some of our innovation projects and some of the other initiatives that we are in the stage of planning right now.
Where the initiative money is, okay.
The one page actually isn't captured in here, I believe, for this one, it's something for council to discuss.
There's 90,000 in the unfunded document, but there's no money for any initiatives at all right now.
I believe we have that as funded, and that would exist within 40% professional and consulting fees.
So we have some in professional and consulting and then another. I'm confused. Okay, it's funded.
Yes.
And it's reflected in professional and consulting services?
Yes.
Cool. Councillor McGowan.
So I guess my question was a similar line. This was obviously a key priority, if not the priority. Are we doing enough? Do you have? We're constantly knocking on your door saying, "What are you doing? What have you got for us?" Are we giving you enough?
I believe with the strategic initiatives as well as the resources we have right now, I believe that 2020.
So strategic initiatives you've got here funded as 90K. Previously we had provided a little bit more than that, I think 150 at some point. Personally, I'm just curious as to, $90,000 for you guys to go out and work your magic. If you're saying good, I don't want to throw money at you, but I just want to make sure that we're asking you every day, what are you doing, right? And I hate you to come back like, well, we only had 90, so we can only do this.
I would, if we have a project where it should require performing that, I would not have to provide for back to council. But at this time, that's what I feel.
Good answer, thanks.
I was going to say, yeah, this is probably those two departments, economic development and communications, are probably the two. There's lots of priorities, but these are probably the two main ones for this year. So, Councillor Stout.
Thank you. I'm just intrigued by lines 70 and 75, recoverable work expenses and revenue, because that's a total decline of 97% for internal costs. Could you just talk me through what that is and why that's declined by such an extent?
Sure, and you'll see that throughout the document. We've
Yes.
reeled in internal costs and internal allocations. Mr. Dowler referred to it before as it becomes kind of white noise within operational folks' budgets to manage their direct expenses. These are all estimates which cost out things like finance, human resources, information technology. We don't see them as useful within the operational departments, so we've removed them.
Okay. I'd have to agree.
Thank you.
I'd have to agree. Further questions on economic development communications? All right, seeing none. We will flip to family services. And so this is probably one of those departments that might be most affected by the provincial government. Are we forecasting any changes due to provincial budget 2020? How did we capture 2019? walk me through how that sort of affected us.
So, as alluded to the other night, there was a decrease in grant revenue specifically for the child care aspect. I might let Ms. Wilson speak a little more on anything else provincial grant related.
With regards to child care, it was just that approximately 38,000 contracts. What else percents the other contracts?
Of course. What about programs that we've been a part of? Because if I'm going straight out of the news here, things like Parent Link got defunded and other programs like that, are we going to have impacts in Beaumont?
So, there's that does end. However, as it says, it's pursuing another contract, the revenue has gone on to, I guess, hopefully get funds to replace those services. But that was not with this budget, that's a totally separate contract.
So it might be, so services provided out from outside organizations, we might see, the impact is not going to be financial for us, but we might have an impact because those don't exist anymore. Okay. Councillor Van Newkirk?
Yeah, thank you. Line 28, just the travel and training. Just wondering if you could speak to the increase from 2019 to 2020. There's probably an initiative or something in there that is contributing to that, or can you speak to that, please? Thank you.
Yeah, kind of along the lines of what was alluded to before. A lot of this training existed at the general manager level before, and now it's being moved down to the operation.
Okay, so this is similar to before. It's a reallocation from above into this, and so next year we would expect to see, 23.4 and that 23.4 reflected unless there was a change of some kind.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Fair.
Councillor Barnard?
Thank you, Your Worship. And so the youth center and the child care costs are all part of this budget, is that correct?
That's correct.
And that the staffing and everything is status quo, and as per the last council meeting, there's no changes to that budget.
Staffing levels remain the same, no changes.
Okay. Wages are the same for 2020.
That's correct.
Okay.
Councillor Stowe?
Thank you. Line 40, professional consulting services, I see has declined by $189,000, 93%. Does that reflect the cost of the Grant Thornton consultancy exercise? Is that what I'm seeing there?
Yes, and the offset to that would be up in transfer from reserve at 125.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Donlett?
Thank you, Your Worship. Similar question to Councillor Monkoff-Swain's question on the previous category. Youth Center is part of this budget. So two questions. First of all, how much is the Youth Center budget? And is that enough to do what they need to do at the Youth Center? Having the tours of the Youth Center with the council was extremely valuable. Understand the value of that program in our community. I don't remember offhand the exact budget number from last year's budget. I think it was like 90,000. I think it was a budget last year for the Youth Center. I think 90 rings a bell for some reason. So can you tell me what the Youth Center budget is for 2020? And Ms. Wilson, you answer me if you think that's enough to do what they need, or do they need a little more to do their good work?
So as we have it for 2020, the Youth Center budget is, on the expense side, $333,000. As mentioned earlier, as part of the service enhancement package we talked about, building maintenance program, is that what we called? So there would be renovations within that dollar amount.
So there is, sorry, jumping in here. So there is some renovations as part of next year's budget? Because that is one of the things I wanted to talk about when we got to the funded and unfunded portion. It's looking kind of sad.
Yeah, as part of the one of the operating service enhancements, facility maintenance program, I believe it's referred to. as I believe there's $30,000 in there for the youth center for 2020.
Okay. Councillor Nicker?
Actually, just building on that, so is it correct to say if it was 333, then the 33 or 30,000 renovation, so it's about a $303,000 line item? Is that, that's the math, but is that correct? What is the actual breakdown of the cost of the youth center, irrespective of the renovations?
So the number I alluded to before, which was 300.
You said 333.
Yes, 333 is for the operations. The building itself's budget is $66K, which includes that 30,000.
So 333,000 to operate it, and then the building is 66.
That's correct.
Thousand, which includes 30,000 of renovations. So the building allocation on the year in the budget would be 36,000 a year to keep the lights on, keep it heated, shovel the snow, all that good stuff. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gosney?
Maybe more of a comment than an observation. I think, so what we have in front of us is, a very general statement, I guess. And I think it's hard for not only me, but for the public to know that sort of information, right? And there's a lot of, I guess, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what to ask about if you don't see it. So certainly not asking you to come back and provide 15 pages for everyone and explain every line item, but I think that's kind of the balance that we're always trying to strive between staying at the high level, but also understanding the specifics of this, right? And I'm all for making this process go smoothly, but just a comment that I wouldn't know that number if I didn't have you guys here in front of me, and there are 18,500 people that don't have access. I mean, obviously they could ask you and you'd be able to give it, but that's just a general comment that sometimes I get frustrated at looking at this and I can't even tell where it would be within this line item. So just food for thought anyway.
Councillor Dunlop?
Thank you. I'm not sure where I got 90,000 from on the youth center. That rang a bell for some reason, but if the budget is roughly 300,000 for the youth center, I know right now it's not open every day of the week. So perhaps some feedback or some suggestion from you saying to open them from 5 days a week to 6 days a week, or from 6 to 7, would that cost an additional 20,000 or 30,000? I'm not saying we should need to increase the budget of the youth center, but at the same time too, it's a very valuable program. I have no idea how much it would cost to increase the services or give some expansion of services. I mean, I'm not sure what they need, because I couldn't tell from the budget what they have right now to figure out what they need. So if you can't answer me now, maybe some feedback tomorrow or on the weekend about what, if they had 20 or 30,000 more, 10, what could they do with that? If they even need that, what they have now is status quo is good. That's good to know as well.
Councillor Gosney?
Maybe just an observation, and I didn't know that we could rent out that space. It was rented on the weekends, on Sundays. That's great. I'm glad you're doing that. It sounds like you're getting, it's full. I was just going to start, putting my communications hat on, and how do we make sure that the whole of Beaumont knows that the space is available. So just think about that. But if you got rented, then obviously, but yeah, obviously meeting rooms and all that sort of stuff for places, and no hotel. People complain about that. Nowhere to go if we got a gathering. So yeah, that's interesting to know, and maybe we could think about promoting that, unless you don't want too many people knocking on your door.
All right, seeing no further requests to speak, take one last ask. Any more comments on the FCSS budget? 4 questions on the FCSS budget. All right, finance. Moving along to finance. Questions, concerns? Yeah, these are the guys you got to keep happy, because they're the ones that keep our lights on and our bills paid, and they pay my salary. I get so that my lights stay on and my bills get paid. We're good. Let's see. Seeing that, we can always come back to it if you got questions later in the weekend. But if well, yeah, that's all those white knives overheads getting. I imagine this is where they got conglomerated.
Yes. A lot of the corporate service type departments would have been allocated out to the operational departments. Once again, it's a value proposition. In certain instances, they so are. In the majority, they are not.
Well, it does clarify a whole lot about what it actually takes to run a particular department if you bring that those human resources charges, those finance charges, those IT charges back to a corporate center. And so it actually lets you know what costs for those as well as your operations. So I'm liking this. This is much more clean. I appreciate it. Councillor Van Newkirk.
Oh, sorry, had we moved on, or are we on human resources, or?
Not yet. I was about to go there.
Okay, yeah, I'll go there.
Yeah. You tuned up before I changed topics. But if we're ready to go to human resources, have at it. Or go back? Okay.
Guys, Mayor, Stewart, and Council. Back to community services for a moment. I had a question I forgot to ask. I apologize. On page 26, on user fees, on Schedule 7, child care program fees were increased by 2%, attending potential policy change. So is community services and will the parents of the child care program get an increase of 2% in their fees for 2020? Is that how I interpret that?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, that's my understanding from our discussion before. Just to clarify, it's in 2%. So when parents ask what's happening, we can tell them, well, after the budget workshop is over. But right now it's sitting at 2% increase.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And we'll get to user fees and charges as a
Right. So I thought one of the community staff got that's a clarifying question. So
yeah. No
thank
worries.
you.
Back to human resources. Councillor Van Newkirk.
Thank you. Just trying to tie together human resources, the dollars and cents in front of us, plus the, the proposed HR software. I'm just wondering what kind of efficiencies, is it right to call that an HR software? I think it was categorized as that in there, but what kind and do we realize efficiencies by having that software that reduces, hours that people spend on other things? Maybe just if you could speak to that a bit. Thank you.
I'll speak a little bit, and then I'll let Ms. Monty in the back speak on it. I know from my perspective, our payroll system, which payroll was under finance for a period of time and now exists under human resources, our payroll software is antiquated at best, so there's some opportunities for growth there. I'll let Donna speak on the human resources side a little bit.
Yeah, so I think we do a lot of the hard work right now, so there's a lot of efficiencies within HR. Our workforce on great things or whatever. So we'll get efficiencies for something that will also be just data and information analysis that we've never had before.
Yeah, no, then that's fine. Yeah, and to, to guide future decisions that you don't even know that you might need to make, right? So, yeah, that's fine. I just was looking to kind of tie the two together because there wasn't really anything, there wasn't a whole bunch that stands out for big ups and downs in this budget, but, we also have that proposed ask as well. So just trying to tie the two together. Thank you.
Fair enough. Councillor Barnhart.
Thank you, Your Worship. Overall, do we know how many new FTEs we have in this entire budget? And I'm raising it here just because it's human resources. I understand it might be the CAO's answer, but you might have that somewhere.
No. So we have 14 FTEs as an increase for the BSRC. From a sheer budget perspective, the net increase was roughly 12 FTEs from a sheerly, this is what we have in the system. Yes.
Okay. Reasonable.
Here you go. Councillor Stote.
Yes. On line 20, salaries and wages on this, that's one of the few that's gone up significantly at 16%. Does that reflect extra personnel being hired?
No, that is a reallocation, like I had mentioned a couple minutes ago, payroll. So it's one FTE moving from finance to HR.
Great, thank you.
Were you going to human resources? Okay. IT. Councillor Margoswing.
So along the lines of Councillor Van Nieuwkerk's question with HR and trying to relate it back to the funded, the growth funded project, we've got this contracted information technology services. So I wondered, I guess if you could speak to what is, how does contracting the IT services, what does that do to the day-to-day operating piece? I don't quite understand from the one pager on page 16. I don't quite understand what that's actually doing. To me, contracting IT services is contracting out, but we're contracting a portion out, we're keeping some. I'm not quite sure. Could you just speak to that?
Sure, I will. I'll start, and then Rob can correct me. If you recall, we did an IT review, and our IT systems are antiquated, to say the least. We've run into some of those problems along the way. Part of our transitioning, even in our line of business, is to do a better job of taking advantage of the digital world and what's out there, technology, new systems, even current systems that we don't have. So we identified the need to add another person to the IT department, that being a director of IT, somebody to think more strategically and look at these digital opportunities. When we looked at that a little bit further and looked at what's out there, municipal world, is that the business, should we be running IT systems? We told ourselves no. So let's go and see what's out there. And that's what we're doing right now. So what we're effectively doing is contracting out the IT services. We have spoken to a couple of service providers, and they agree that an organization our size needs some boots on the ground. So right now we currently have 2, so those will stay. But rather than hire a director or a more senior IT person, we've elected to go by contract. That'll give us the opportunity to take advantage of technologies that are out there that we don't even know. Rob, did you want to add?
Really, so the existing staff will continue to be involved in this and service function work, provide some this is a flexible organization can have the disposal, but the size of the government, so giving us that scalable expertise that's position.
So if I'm hearing you properly, we've got status quo essentially, but then we're going to a contract model for 115K for above and beyond to improve efficiencies and all that sort of stuff. Is that okay? Second question, if you don't mind, and it's yours is on that topic.
Switching topics from the contract.
Yeah. You go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just wondering, should this be funded? What is the timeline on the RFP, putting out the RFP, and when, if you're staring your crystal ball, when would you like to kind of land with a solution? Is it Q1 this year yet, or is it Q2, or just looking at RFP timing and implementation timing?
The RFP closed as of last night, so in the next couple of weeks. and we'll keep having position on the functions physically over the next month. 1 to 2 months. It's a past experience in this type of situation. One is with the service level, and the units and both responsible. Understood.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Margolis?
Yeah, so time for my annual question about technology within this space here and ability to dial in, Skype in remotely, all that sort of stuff. Have we thought about that? I mean, it looks like our camera's been working for the last kind of 4 or 5 months here without any glitches, which is great. Just wondered if you guys had considered anything within, from an IT perspective, within council chambers to improve remote access and that sort of thing.
Theo?
As part of bringing in an organization that does this for a living, we're hoping to get better ideas. There's a number of IT changes we would like to make right now, and we've held off and decided let's see what this RFP produces and see what kind of technologies they can recommend for us.
Okay, so and I appreciate this discussion here is just purely dollars and cents. I think it'd be interesting once you got that up and running. Be curious to bring it back at some point, whether it's committee of the whole, just to talk about those what you're thinking there, just for our discussion purposes. Thank you.
Councillor Barr?
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, one of the challenges, we have to ask the questions because it's not laid out as to where the enhancements are, as to what line item. And I get thrown every time by looking at the bottom line and seeing very large numbers and percents, and I look back up and it's the amortization or something else recoverable. So if I'm reading this IT budget correctly, there's really a decrease in the expenses. No. Yes. A decrease in expenses.
Yes, I would direct the most relevant section for expenses would be this other section once again. So there's a net $3,900 decrease.
So we're spending less.
Yes, in this instance.
And yet we just talked about needing to spend more, and there's 115,000 funded. So that's where you lost me. I thought I had it, and then I lost it.
Sure, there would be one time, as there's transfers from reserves at the top, so there would be some one-time phase-ins from the year before.
So it's one time.
Right.
Just for future reference, I think it would be really helpful the council to have kind of the enhancements on the same page as that to be able to see where things are located, because it is difficult, and I can't imagine how members of the community are going to be able to figure that out if we don't make it a little clearer.
Further discussion at this time on IT? All right, so moving along to infrastructure.
Okay.
Just give them a chance to digest some information. Nope. Yeah, that'll all come as one big package. Because then otherwise we jump back and forth too hard. Yeah. All right, so does anybody have any questions? Councillor Van Newkirk.
I suppose this would be the time to ask the transit question, and where the dollars and cents from the transit shortfall comes into this and what that shortfall is anticipated for 2020. Thank you.
Sure. So with the previous years, there was a transit phase in a draw from the reserve. There still is for 2020, the amount being 190,000. The short, so that puts the net cost at 311,000. For 2021, that would complete the phase-in to increase the shortfall to 500K.
Councilor Margaspe?
Follow up on that.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up.
Sorry,
on
you
that.
tripped your mic off.
Yeah, I did because I thought it was done and then.
Follow up?
Yes. So if you could just repeat all that, it didn't flow through here. So we got 190,000, we got 311, and then we got 500 something. Can you just walk through that again? Sorry.
Sure. So since the inception of transit, there's been a transfer from reserve to offset or phase in the program itself, which would be running at a deficit of approximately $500,000. So assuming it would be at a deficit of $500,000 for 2019, there's still a reserve transfer for 190,000 to ease that deficit to 311,000.
Okay, so the number is how much did transit cost us in 2019? How much is transit going to cost us in 2020? I guess maybe
approximately the same, 300,000.
But you've transferred
money though. You've softened that already. What's the whole cost of it?
500.
500 in 2019 and 500 in 2020 is the cost of the program.
Right.
Okay, and is that less revenues?
That's the same revenues. There was the grant for Smart Fare. When the Director of Infrastructure is here, she can speak on that slightly more, unless we have somebody here that can speak on it. But that was obviously removed with the new provincial budget, so there was that component as well for 164,000.
But it's 500 minus, let's say we get 150K revenue.
Right.
So net is per year?
Net per year for 19 and for 2020 is 300,000 approximately.
Sorry, that's the
factoring in reserve
311
transfers, which was the phase-in.
So the reserve transfers is what's So it costs us this much money. Riders come on and pay us this much money. So what is that number? I don't know.
He's saying transfers from some other fund to soften the blow.
Yeah.
And we're wondering.
So like simplify it right down.
Sure.
Like, yeah.
So costs for the 19 budget, we'll start there.
Yeah.
And I want to exclude Smart Fare because that's one time. Approximately 600,000. Revenue net of grants and transfers from reserves is approximately 90,000. So that's that 500K number. If we're just talking direct expenses, direct revenues, it's 500,000.
Yeah.
In that ballpark.
Yeah, that's the simplification I was kind of looking for. So thank you.
I mean, as long as you're speaking about transit, because I know that contract's up in the fall. And I know we've had some initiatives surrounding perhaps some transit enhancements, so to speak, around both within the Transit Commission and outside the Transit Commission to both improve service within our own community, such as bus on demand. We've talked about like Cochrane's doing, and increasing commuter service to make it a little more user friendly for some of us. Do we have room in the budget to look at some of those initiatives, or are is that going to come back later? CO?
Give you an HR answer. It depends. With the numbers that Mr. DeBlanco was talking about, with the fact that the contract is coming up this year, yes, we've had some discussions on a different type of service, both within the community and external. There's so many moving parts that we may have to come back with a proposal and say, well, obviously it's a service change, so we will bring that service change back. And when we do, we'll have a better feel whether it's going to cost more or cost less. So I don't have a number for you. We're not that far.
No, fair enough. I just want to, because I know in the back of my mind, with the contract coming up, it's a good time to make some changes if we're going to make some changes. So, sure, go ahead.
It took me off.
Sorry, wasn't sure if that was new or.
Yeah, so a couple of things, not for tonight, but that number surprised me. The 510 in terms of total doesn't jive with what we provided to the Transit Commission. So if we could have Ms. Lewin take a look at that, with that number versus what we provided, just to make sure those numbers are accurate for tomorrow. And then there's also potentially, if things move with the Transit Commission, some potential startup costs. I assume that's not included in here.
I would have to defer to Ms. Lewin, but
Okay.
I would.
If we could get those two answered tomorrow, please. Thank you. Sorry. Was that question clear, the first one? Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm making some notes to make sure I get back to it. Just give me a second. Okay, any other questions on infrastructure within the city or this particular budget line within the city? Councillor Van Newkirk.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just still marinating on this one here. In the infrastructure, at what point do we have to start as a municipality doing maintenance on our stormwater ponds, and when does that start hitting a budget? I'm assuming because our stormwater ponds are all young that we haven't had to do a whole bunch with them, but how soon does that cost start getting factored into our forecasting later on? I think that would come under infrastructure. I don't know. Just a quick question. Thank you.
I guess I'll take a shot at this. I think the short answer is as soon as possible. When you're looking at replacing assets like that, you want to build it in as soon as possible so that the requirement that you're going to need at the end of it is built up when you need it. You don't want a huge increase like in the final 2 years before you actually require the money to replace the asset. So I think regardless of the age of the asset, we'd probably, if it's not already in the budget and we don't actually have the appropriate reserve transfers or utility rates that will fund it, we need to be looking at that sooner rather than later. It's kind of that.
And are we aware if that's in there or not? I guess would be my next question.
Yeah, and that's the one I'd have to defer to the Director of Infrastructure, and we can come back with that response tomorrow night.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Any further questions, comments on infrastructure? Planning and development. So next. No. Okay. I'm seeing some nodding heads. You're going to get away. Councillor Danluck.
I'll take a shot at something, just keep the conversation going.
Thanks, Councillor. Appreciate it.
Well, I just thought I'd ask the question. So,
Yeah, it's good.
how are we at in terms of staffing with our safety codes officers doing inspections around the city properties? With the recent situation we had with daycare, we've realized there was an issue with not having proper classification. Are we staffed properly enough to be proactive in our that part of our responsibilities?
Monitors are going to kick it off. Wrong. I guessed wrong.
I'm breaking things over here. Through your worship to Councillor Daniluk, we are sufficiently staffed in terms of what we need to be able to complete those types of inspections. We have a Class 3 safety codes officer who is actually has certification, designation, I guess, to be able to do all types of inspections on all of our commercial assets, schools, that sort of thing, as well as then the Class 1. So we do have that sufficient capability within the city.
Councillor Van Newkirk.
Tying it back to a user fee that I saw that jumped. I know we're not there yet, but the planning side of things on the fast track fee, I did see a jump in that. Is that a jump because it is a fee that's too low that requires more hours to do, or is it a jump due to the market conditions and in lieu of the last comment on staffed well enough, just wondering how the staffed well enough and the fee increase kind of go together. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. Through your worship to Councillor Van Newkirk. Part of the fast track residential permit process, you will see that there was some fees that have been increased from $525 to $750. Part of that has been a convenience fee as well. To have that, we've had a number of fast track permits coming through, and in fact, quite a majority seem to be coming through at the fast track process, which creates its own issues as well. So this is to offset some of those costs that we incur internally to be able to do that, as well as to provide more of that convenience fee.
Paul?
Yeah, I think that's good for now, and when we go through fees and charges, I'll probably ask more then, but that's good for now. Thank you.
Getting back to programming, back to safety codes officers. Anecdotally, over the last couple of years, seems to be, how do I put it politically correctly, some complaints about customer service levels from our safety codes people. Is there any intention of having some type of review to see about how they interact with the public and improvements that can be made?
Thank you, Your Worship. As part of the concierge service that Mr. Maffin was talking about, we will be instituting a new commercial process, which is where some of our complaints have become. But also there is a public engagement, I think, component that needs to go along with that as well, in that the safety codes officer is there to do inspections, right? They're there to maintain that. And they're not really there to provide that solution for them. They need to hire that contracted professional. Lots of times our safety codes officers have actually gone above and beyond in delivering those solutions for them, or not really solutions, but they have. Yeah. We've provided a lot of inspections, moved vacation times, done different things to try to accommodate a lot of last minute requests. We are extremely flexible in that. But some of those challenges, we will admit, we are working through some of those, and we are aware of them.
Yeah, some of the ones that have specifically come to me, and don't get me wrong, that's great. I love the fact that you're flexible in doing that. But it's when they go out and can contract a professional, and the professional engineer puts a stamp on something, and we still turn it down. And so I know that doesn't happen very often. But it's one of those things that's a frustration in our development community, and so I was wondering if there's a way to address that at some point.
Thank you, Your Worship. We will take that back under advisement, and we'll get back to you.
Thank you. Any further questions on planning and development? No. Moving along to protective services. This would be policing, fire, and bylaw. Councillor Daniluk.
Thank you, Your Worship. On the line 20, salary and wages, a significant reduction in that area of this particular department. But I do believe the school resource officer would be in this category, would she not? So she would be in this category, and I'm surprised the wages are going down quite that much with the new addition to one particular officer in this area, I believe she's accountable in this area.
So the salary for that particular officer was in the budget in 19, so it wouldn't be a net increase in that capacity.
Okay.
As far as the decrease in salaries and wages, I'd have to go back and look at the specifics. Part of it would certainly be. Oh, actually, I know the exact answer. Once again, back to the GM, Community and Protective Services, the restructure. So that GM salary would have been presented within these lines, as well as the individuals within that GM department.
Okay, thank you. Follow-up question, please. Sure. I believe we have currently 3 bylaw officers, and that seems to be fully staffed. Is that still the case, as far as we know, at this budget time?
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
I know we have a policing plan to add 1 officer per year. Is that covered in this?
To my knowledge, yes.
Cool. Councillor Van Newkirk?
Yeah, thank you. And policing plan, thank you for that question. I was going to ask the same on the bylaw officer. Just wondering if we had any proactive plans to add more bylaw officers in the future, or if it was scheduled for 2021 or 2022, or what that growth might look like in the community. Thank you.
See you.
The Director of Protective Services, Mr. Cook, is looking at our total number versus services and any service changes or enhancements that he wants to make. At this point in time, there's no plan to add any bylaw or municipal enforcement. If that changes, then we'll obviously come back and explain why.
Any questions, concerns? That brings us to the end of departments, because the library will be in tomorrow to do a presentation. So it being 8:20, I will give council the option to proceed into utilities, or we can call it here and pick back up tomorrow. Utilities? Okay, so we will complete utilities, and then that'll be it for this evening. No, I want to think about some of this stuff, because I've heard some things, so. So it's page 48, utilities. Councillor Dallin.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I may ask Mr. DeBlanco a moment to just indulge me and just kind of give me, if you don't mind, a very quick lesson what offset levies are and how they work. I know how they work one day, and the next day I kind of think, I kind of understand them, and sometimes I don't. So you don't mind giving me just a quick little tutorial on what they are, please?
Sure. I might defer this question to Ms. Raymond in the back.
Oh, right on. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship, through to Councillor Danilek. So off-site levies, the City of Beaumont currently collects off-site levies for 3 different types of infrastructure. Those are transportation, wastewater, and water. Sorry. I'm blanking. So those are collectively referred to as hard levies, and they are off-site impacts from developing neighborhoods. So they are things that impact all of Beaumont, not just one specific neighborhood that is currently being developed. Those would be handled through development agreements, and those costs would be attributed that way. Stormwater is an example of an on-site local matter that's handled through development agreements. Transportation, all the land in Beaumont pays into the transportation levy across the board. To everybody, and the funds are primarily arterial roads and upgrades to those. Stormwater. Should have more coffee, but I've already went over. So the wastewater is on a case-by-case basis, and the ones we're trying divided down into 5 different categories of accounts. So it's typically over to commercial, so low density residential, high density residential, and then industrial as well. So that's all kind of an area depending on where you are developing within Beaumont. So obviously, depending on what infrastructure improvements are required to be able to get there, reservoir or capacity service that land, and those will be higher in those areas where developing access plan for a little bit more capacity in the north and south and the west of Beaumont. To offset this, you'll see that when the budget package there only to be used for that specific infrastructure that they were collected for. So, and over time, over 25 years, they identify, so which gets to zero at 25 years. So sometimes we'll bring up all of those, sometimes we'll positive, but over time, they're going to invest need to be made, that money comes back to the farm.
Follow-up? Thank you for that explanation. It makes a lot more sense today than I did a few days ago, so that's good. So in the case of a new subdivision, we expect a 25-year lifespan to get the offset levies back collected. Is that what you're suggesting from a practical implementation perspective? Excuse me.
Through your worship, Councillor Daniluk, over time, each neighborhood might be a little bit different.
Right.
So that would be just for that course, the levy type that we would expect that it would pay back over that amount of time. And each neighborhood might have a differing horizon as to when it becomes a cost, breaks even on its costs.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Van Newkirk.
Thank you. Just trying to tie back some of the high-level numbers we saw in the introduction. The transfer from reserve in 2020 at $1,035,000 is the $1 million would be for that camera study. That's correct. And then the 35 would have been for the upgrade feasibility study. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'll talk about the upgrade feasibility study more when we get into that section. Thank you.
Councillor Barnard?
Thank you. And I think my question is similar. Is utilities are theoretically supposed to be user pays. And so is that the difference? The $1 million is because of the other enhancements we're making to the program? Or is there some other reason why there's $1 million coming out of taxes? Or am I reading that wrong? Which is entirely possible.
So currently there should be no funding from taxes for the utility operations. Yeah, at the bottom of the page, so right below the total expense line, you see 000. And so that in and of itself means there's no draw on the tax levy. Line 67 reserve expense is actually the transfer to the reserve, so that would be the net amount that the utility operations is bringing in more revenue than they are spending, and so that gets transferred to the utility reserve.
Thank you. I just was one line off. Thank you.
Sure.
And so the only increases we're expecting in utility rates are those that are being passed on to us through the commissions?
That's correct. Yeah.
Councillor Stowe.
Thank you. Line 41, license permits and fee expenses. Could you just explain what that's for me? And also, I noticed it's gone up 64%. That's quite a big increase. What are the extra licenses, permits, and fees we're anticipating paying?
So that would include the $1 million and the 35 that's being transferred from reserves.
Okay.
Closed circuit.
So that's where that's going.
Yes.
What else? What's the remainder then? What else are we paying for? Could you?
So the net difference would be 200,000. I can't identify specifically what that is. We could get back to you with that answer.
Okay, I was
Sure.
just looking for a general idea of how we would incur that cost.
Sure. I would imagine it would be one-time things or just transfer of dollar amounts within the utilities budget itself. I'm not sure. I can't tell you right now specifically what it is, but the bulk of it would be that closed circuit TV inspections.
Okay.
Any further questions on utilities? No. Okay, so having a quick look, our council can think about it. We've been through the departmental budgets. We've asked some questions. If you have more questions tomorrow, I will incorporate a section at the beginning of the meeting so that you can answer those questions. If you have more tonight over anything that we've talked about, I'm going to give you a chance in a couple seconds to ask them. My intention tomorrow is to start with the library, finish that, and then we will start to hit page 11, operating changes to service, and we'll deal with those funded and unfunded items and some other things if they're not currently in the book. Council, we can add them and debate them at the time, and then we will move right on into capital. Same thing. So are there any further questions or comments about what we've covered this evening? Okay. Any further comments or questions about the proposed way forward? And then I'll just open it up to general comments. General comments before we close for the evening. Councillor Montgomery.
Just a question and a strange one, and I don't need an answer from you today, but Saturday is a little bit difficult for me from a childcare perspective, and so I'm curious for people to go and think about it, any opposition for me to have my 4-month-old son with me here during this process. I got it all sorted, I know what I'm doing. If he goes crazy, then I'll step out, but I find childcare for my 5 and 3-year-old, but my 4-month-old is a bit of a struggle. Not everyone wants to take that on, as you can imagine. So just have a think about that. Don't need to know right now, but if you could just check back in with me tomorrow.
I don't need to think about it. I'm family friendly. Bring him along. Okay. And that's the next question. We may not be here Saturday. Yeah, I was going to say. No, this is family friendly. I've had kids. If you need to, bring them. Don't even worry about it. And like I say, we may not be here Saturday. We're proceeding at a pretty good clip. So we may not be in Saturday. We may take 10 minutes of the committee of the whole meeting to have a quick wrap up if there's any outstanding issues. No, I just, the way we're headed, I'm thinking we might be okay. All right. Seeing no further questions, if you have some more and you wish to provide them in advance, please do so. If not, like I say, we'll have a quick opportunity for recapping what we went through tonight tomorrow. And then we will proceed as proposed. Are there any further questions, concerns from administration this evening before I close down session number 1? Are there any further questions or concerns from admin that they would like to cover tonight before we close down session 1? He's already shook his head. I'm looking over here. Shook his head. Well, yeah, you had you were the single, yeah, your department's the worst, like, for this whole department. All right, thanks everybody for tonight. Appreciate it. Good work by all. And we'll consider session number 1 closed, and we'll pick it back up same time, same place tomorrow. Thank you.